Well, we're getting ready to move into week 8. Week 7 have brought a lot of excitement. Some of it lived up to the hype, and some of it didn't. Obviously, one of those games that didn't was the Forreston Lena Winslow game, where Lena Winslow put on a running clock for the first time in that series' history with a 46-14 win over Forreston. Um, but it was a big game. Obviously, Forreston controlled the line early on, forcing Lena Winslow to do some things differently. They got their first score through the air on a pass play, which was not generally Lena Winslow style. And then they just kind of started to wear Forreston down. And really, the turning point in that game was when Forreston was already down 16-0, had the long drive all the way down to the 2-yard line before Lena Winslow pushed them away, and they turned the ball over on downs, and 2 plays later, Ronnie Valentine's running up the sideline for a 96-yard touchdown run.
It was an interesting game, to say the least. I know initially we had talked about whether or not both of these teams could play 4 quarters. Lena didn't have to play 4 quarters, so I don't know. I think Forreston has to take a look in the mirror and figure some things out, with Aquin.
Yeah.
As they head over to Aquin.
Yeah, they got Aquin this week, so obviously they're going to have another big game coming into week 8, which we'll mention down the road. Some other big games as well around the state. Obviously, you had Maroa Forsyth and Athens play each other in a 1A versus 2A matchup down in the Sangamo. That game was tied at halftime 7-7. Maroa Forsyth pulled that one out 21-7. But if you take a look at Athens, they're sitting at 5-2, and those 2 losses are to Milledgeville, who's ranked number 1 in Class 3A, and Maroa Forsyth, who, some people have him ranked number 1, some people have him ranked number 2. I think the AP had him at number 3. So you take a look at that, and Athens is definitely a team to watch come playoff time, especially in that South bracket. And another one is Moweaqua Central A&M. They continue to roll as they put up a big win over Clinton, 42-6. Some other big matchups, obviously Morrison got their 7th win with a 26-0 win over Erie Prophetstown. That was kind of a sloppy game from what I'd heard from some people down there. Aurora Christian loses. They fall to 3-4 to Bishop McNamara, 44-34. Keep in mind, Bishop McNamara is ranked number 8 in Class 4A. And Bishop Mac has 3 losses, so they're sitting at a 4-3 record right now, likely to get into the playoffs with a 6-3 record. But Aurora Christian plays River Grove Guerin this week. That should be a win to get the Eagles to 4-4. But in week 9 they play Wheaton Academy, and that's a game that Aurora Christian is going to have to win in order to make the playoffs. If they don't win that game, they're not going to be in. And right now, Wheaton Academy is favored. Taking a look at some other games around to Tuscola beat Warrensburg Latham. Anawan Weathersfield beat Rova as expected. Ottawa Marquette beat South Beloit as anticipated. They too will have another big game this week as they play Kirkland Hiawatha. It'll be the second time those 2 teams have met this year, as they met up back in week 3 where Marquette won 41-35. Fulton had a big win over Riverdale. They moved to 5-2, which was a big thing for Fulton because that win will generate them the opportunity to play in the playoffs, as they have some tough competition coming up the next 2 weeks, playing Spring Valley Hall, and they still have to play Sterling Newman. Moving over into Class 2A, obviously Fieldcrest moves to 7-0 with their 43-0 win. Clifton Central, this is a team that is 7-0. They're ranked high in Class 2A. Some people have them 2, some people have them at 3. I'm starting to wonder if they should be ranked that high. And the reason why I say that on Clifton Central is if you take a look at some of the teams they have beat, and you look at their strength of schedule, it doesn't necessarily match up with the strength of schedule of some of the teams that are ranked below them, such as GCMS, Sterling Newman, St. Teresa. Even Pana has played a pretty tough schedule. In fact, Pana is sitting at 7-0, and they're getting ready to take on Vandalia, who's also sitting at 7-0. Vandalia and Pana are both listed in the state rankings for Class 3A. Both of those teams have a high probability of dropping into Class 2A in the South bracket there. But, you know, that's another thing, too. You look at where 2A is at, and, you know, 2A is kind of wide open. I mean, you take a look. Central A&M, they beat St. Teresa. St. Teresa's ranked in Class 2A in some polls, Class 3A in others. You take a look at Chicago Hope. Chicago Hope has beat a Class 2A ranked team in Bismarck-Henning. You take a look at Morrison. Morrison has beat Sterling Newman, who is highly ranked in Class 2A. Obviously, Athens lost to Moreau Forsyth, who's ranked in Class 2A, but they've also, like we stated, lost to 3A. And then, of course, Lena Winslow, you can put Lena Winslow in the picture. Granted, they haven't played anybody that's ranked in Class 2A, but you can match them up with some of those guys that are in Class 2A and say, yeah, Lena Winslow's going to get them.
But, I mean, Lena is for sure staying in Class 1A. I don't, you know.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah. I mean, their enrollment's too small. They're sitting at like 232. So don't get misconstrued there, people. And when I talk 1A, 2A, I'm just trying to compare Lena Winslow to the 2A group of teams that are going to be making the playoffs. Obviously, Nashville continues to run at 7-0 down there in the Black Diamond Conference. Bismarck-Henning improved to 6-1. Knoxville 7-0. Fairfield 7-0. And the reason why we mentioned Fairfield is Fairfield's one of those teams that's also getting rankings in Class 3A. They too are a team that is on that bubble right now as the lines keep shifting. That bubble for Class 2A is much higher this year than what we've seen in years past, and Fairfield would right now would fall into that 2A, 3A bubble, and I have them projected in 2A at this moment. Of course, that can change as other teams win out. You take a look at one of those games was yesterday where Orangeville beat Stockton. That is going to probably change that line just a little bit because as one team comes in, another team moves out. And as another team moves out, then another team moves out. So big win by Orangeville there that will probably shift the line, taking a look at Orangeville's schedule as they have Dakota and Milledgeville left on schedule. And they take on Dakota this week in Dakota, so that's a big game too for the NUIC. As both those teams are looking to become playoff eligible in that game. Obviously, Stockton, another team, has East Dubuque this week and then Dakota. So, you know, a good balance right there. And those 3, 4, and 3 teams could play a lot of havoc. And if all 3 of them get in, it's a great thing for the NUIC. But it will shift that line just a little bit. But that's what makes this projection so much fun. So obviously, taking a look at some big games this week. You know, you take a look at in the NUIC.
Yeah, you've got the West Carroll and Du-Pec game, which that's going to be a great game just from the standpoint of like 2 2A teams. And they're both potentially playoff eligible. So, well, they are playoff eligible, aren't they?
Yep. They're already playoff eligible.
I mean, that's going to be great for them. You've got Aquin and Forreston, which will be an intriguing matchup. And then you've got Orangeville and Dakota, like you just lightly touched on.
Yeah, so big games there for the NUIC. Even Stockton's in a situation where they need to win this week against East Dubuque because waiting for them in Week 9 will be Dakota. So that'll be a great game there as well in 2 weeks from now. Looking at the schedule around the state, Athens takes on North Mac this week. Marquette and Hiawatha, like we touched on earlier. Morrison plays Rockridge. Surprisingly, Rockridge is at 2-4 on this, or no, I'm sorry, they were 2-4 going into the Week 7 game. Can't remember if they won that or not. I think they did to move to 3-4. But either way, Rockridge not having the season people thought that they could have. Granted, they were a little bit off, thought they were going to be at least a playoff type team, and Morrison here has taken everybody by surprise, especially after they beat Newman a couple weeks ago, 18-6. Big game in 1A2 is Chicago Hope. They're playing a 6A school in Thornwood. Thornwood is 5-2 after they lost to Crete Moni last week. But that's going to be a tough game for Hope. Hope obviously is sitting at 6-1. And so they're already in the playoffs. And a lot of people were wondering if they'd get to that mark, considering that the schedule that they had played. But they've done a really good job of controlling their own destiny there. Fieldcrest and Eureka, that's the other one, down in the Heart of Illinois Conference. Fieldcrest obviously undefeated. Eureka is ranked number 10 in Class 3A. That's a big game for Fieldcrest there. Should go in Fieldcrest's favor, but obviously you still got to show up to play the game. Let's see, what other big ones we have here. Pana and Vandalia. Both teams are undefeated there. They got the SEC title game pretty much in store here in Week 8, so that'll be big for both of those two schools. And Auburn has a game with Porta, as Auburn's sitting at 5-2, so they're playoff eligible. Just trying to make that click. And then Orion with Bureau Valley. Orion lost last week to Newman to fall to 4-3, so they need to get a win this week to become playoff eligible as well. That's going to be a big game for the Chargers there. So there's a look at some of the big games around the state. We're going to start to break down our NUIC teams and games going into Week 8 right now. So we're going to open up with our big crossover game this week, where West Carroll and Du-Pec square off in Pecatonica. Both teams come in with a 5-2 mark. Last week, West Carroll beat Milledgeville 22-0, and Du-Pec beat East Dubuque 28-8. And last year, this was a game that was really close. West Carroll won 6-0 in Week 2. It was actually a game that Du-Pec felt that they could have won, as they actually had more yardage in that game than West Carroll, had more control overall in the game, but it was West Carroll who squeaked out the win. Obviously, this year, both teams are already playoff eligible, as we described in our preview. Big game, though, obviously, not last week, but the week before, West Carroll showed what they can do against a perennial power in Forreston, where they only lost to 2 points. Du-Pec, on the other hand, doing what they need to do to get by, but they still don't have that quality win against any opponent that is going to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, you know, you were talking about the line, you know. How does that adjust things? You start talking about playoff points and all that other stuff that goes along with it. I was going to say, other than West Carroll, the only team Du-Pec has left on the schedule is Lena Winslow, and
right.
You know,
so
I need to say about that.
Right. So obviously this game's going to give you some seeding issues, because basically the way I've been projecting it is, right now, every 1A and 2A and even 3A, 5 and 4 team keeps projecting to make the field of 32 in their respective classes. And looking at some things that Steve Susi, the bracketologist, has put together himself, he even thinks that there's going to be the potential of 4 and 5 teams in the upper classes that can make the playoffs. And if you take a look at the current playoff outlook in those upper classes, there's a lot of 3 and 3 teams sitting right there that those games could go any way. I mean, there's a lot of toss-up games that are still yet to be played. And so right now, trying to get a clearer picture in those upper classes is really putting an effect on the smaller classes as well. Because as you see, I mean, the stability in Class 2A, with the cutoff line being much higher than it traditionally is, has put a monkey wrench in the whole thing. I mean, right now the only stability is in Class 1A and Class 3A. Class 1A's cutoff is tampering right around 305, 310, where it traditionally is at, and Class 3A is sitting right around that 564, 565 mark, where it is traditionally around. So 2A's really throwing a lot of havoc in the field for the lower classes right now. But like we stated, you get some smaller teams that start moving things, and that's where it could potentially affect Du-Pec, as Du-Pec's enrollments at 412. Currently, they are projecting into Class 2A, and right now that cutoff line is projecting at 426. But if that projection line keeps coming down, that's going to keep pushing Du-Pec closer to going back into 3A. Do I see that happening? No, I do not. I don't think it will happen. I think Du-Pec is going to stay in Class 2A. But this game here is going to determine where each between them and the Thunder go come seeding time. And obviously, the more wins you get, the more chances you get to play at home. Right now, based off projections alone, you're going to need a 7-2 record to get a home game. But at least in the first round, that is, you win that first round, then you're going to get a home game in the second round most likely. This game is huge, though. Obviously, you want to see either team win, gets more playoff points for the teams in front of them that also affect, seedings and things like that. But I like the Thunder. I like the Thunder in this game.
I went back and forth on this game. There's a couple games this week that I've gone back and forth on. After watching West Carroll and Forreston, that game spoke volumes about what West Carroll is, but it also spoke volumes on how important Derek Tracy is. And so going back and forth on that, but with Du-Pec, you've got their line, just like West Carroll's is, and then Hunter Hoffman. So I really feel like this is going to come down to which, can Tracy keep his team calmer, or can Hunter keep his team calmer? But I think I'm going to have to take West Carroll in this matchup.
We move into the North Division, and the first game is going to be dynamite right out of the bag as Orangeville travels to Dakota. Both teams come in with a 4-3 mark. Obviously, last week Orangeville beat Stockton 12-8 in a game that, early on in the season you probably would have picked, but as of late you probably would have went the other way and picked Stockton to win it.
This game went exactly how I thought it was going to go.
Likewise, Dakota had a battle with Galena on their hands where they pulled that one out with a 20-12 win. The last time these two teams met came back in 2008 where Dakota won in Week 7 24-14, but then Orangeville pulled off the playoff upset in Round 1 20-7 to send the Indians home early as Dakota had entered the playoffs with the number 1 ranking, the number 1 seed, and they were also undefeated at the time. Orangeville, obviously, big win there. Last time they played was the last time that Orangeville beat them as well. This year, obviously, a little bit different scenario going on. Orangeville's trying to look for their 3rd straight playoff trip. Dakota's looking for their 6th straight playoff trip. Obviously, both sitting at 4-3. Dakota's got the tougher schedule left between the two of them because they have Orangeville this week, Stockton next week, whereas Orangeville, getting that win over Stockton this past week, has Dakota and then Milledgeville, where, right now, based off of things going, Orangeville should be able to get that win over Milledgeville. But if you're the Broncos, you want to come in at Dakota, your old rival, you haven't played in 11 years, and you want to get that win. Obviously, this is going to be a game where both teams are going to run. Both teams can spread it out to give them more space. Both teams will be capable of throwing the ball if needed. I think that right now, I would say both teams are average at best at throwing the ball currently, just based off stats. You look at passing yards per game. Obviously, both these teams want to run the ball more than they do wanting to pass the ball. But you got a lot of good players in this game. Obviously, with Orangeville, you have Garrett Rodeball at running back, and of course, you know, the Indians are going to be keen on him in this matchup, wanting to shut him down to force Orangeville's hand. But when you're Orangeville and you're like,
hey, we've got Kleckler, we've got Lowe, and we've got Jordan, and Doyle, I mean, take your pick.
Right. And when they're healthy and they're clicking, it becomes a different offense. Obviously, Dakota's going to answer that with Heilmeyer and Riggle. Gosh. But then you got Josh Clark that's been exceptionally well at running the veer-style offense that Dakota has put in place. In fact, looking back, Josh has ran for over 100 yards in each of the last 2 games. First time a Dakota quarterback has run for 100 yards in back-to-back games in school history. So, obviously, what they're doing works for what Dakota has. And Josh is extremely well at handling the ball in that veer offense because he's not afraid to take a hit. So he will hold on to it until the latest minute possible. And that becomes very effective with the Dakota offense. Defensively, both teams seem to be very good at pass defense. Orangeville has been susceptible to the pass a little bit. Dakota much improved this year. They're only giving up about 66 yards a game passing-wise, and they have a boatload of interceptions to go with it. But Orangeville's run defense has been, I mean, outside of the game with Lena Winslow, their game has been much better. And I tell you what, this is going to be a hard-hitting game, and I'm really excited for it. But being in Dakota, I like Dakota in this game.
This is one of the other games that I went back and forth with. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be very close. But I have to agree and go with Dakota.
Next game's going to take us to Stockton, where the Blackhawks come in with a 4-3 record, and they are going to play host to East Dubuque. East Dubuque coming in with a 2-5 mark. Last week, East Dubuque lost to Du-Pec 28-8, where Stockton lost to Orangeville 12-8. Last time these two teams met was in 2014, where Stockton won in Week 5, 22-14. And you take a look at this game, and you look at East Dubuque, and you look at Stockton, and on paper, it's like Stockton, no doubt. But what we've seen East Dubuque do has been able to wreak havoc in games. It's just not showing up in the win column, but it could. Stockton, on the other hand, sitting at 4-3. They want to be able to come into this game needing to get a win, wanting to get a win before they head over to Dakota for that Week 9 contest they got coming up.
Well, and it's really interesting because for one, I feel like for once at least, we are looking at 2 teams who have had a similar walk to this point in the regular season. You know, they've both played Galena. They've both played Milledgeville. You know, they've both played AFC. I mean, this is really going to be interesting because, you know, of their previous competition at this point.
Correct. I agree with that. And obviously, Stockton has had the upper hand on the competition that East Dubuque has not had. And that goes back to, I think, more, not necessarily discipline, but it's just the way that Stockton's offense is geared. I guess you could call it somewhat more disciplined. They're systematic. They know what they want to do. They know where they're going to go. East Dubuque knows what they want to do, but a lot of times they're spreading it out. And as you get into some of these contests with teams that are able to stop the run and shut you down, it forces you to only go to the pass. And granted, East Dubuque can throw the ball really well. I mean, Zach Meyer is one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year. I mean, he's throwing over 60%. He's probably, I know for sure, he's top 3 in passing yardage in the conference this year. So you take a look at those things, and East Dubuque has the weapons to be good. I mean, we saw them play with Orangeville, who they darn near upset Orangeville, who Orangeville just beat Stockton.
Yeah, they're similar to like Galena. Where
Yeah.
you look at their record,
the record's not speaking.
It doesn't say anything about what the team really is.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what you have here. So, I mean, if Stockton were to come into this game thinking, oh yeah, it's just East Dubuque that we have coming up, they're going to have a hard thing coming at them, because I tell you what, you take a look at some things with East Dubuque, and granted, East Dubuque's missing one of their best players. I mean, he's been out. He missed the majority of the first part of the season, came back against Aquin, injured himself again, and he's been out ever since. So, and it's unfortunate because he's a hell of an athlete, but and he would be a huge thing for the East Dubuque offense right now. But you got to play with what you have available, and East Dubuque's done a good thing of that. I mean, that game against Orangeville that we saw, they were explosive. I mean, they weren't afraid to come up and hit you. They were ready for you. And granted, last week they lost to Du-Pec, and, and Du-Pec kind of favors playing a passing type team. Stockton's going to have to come ready. They're going to have to come ready to stop the pass. If I were them, I would continue to keep running the ball, though. Control the clock, control the ball, control the pace of the game, and you'll probably come away with a win. It's going to be a hard-fought game, but being in Stockton, I like the Blackhawks.
I also like Stockton.
The last game in the North Division takes us to Galena, where the Winslow Panthers will play host to Galena. The Pirates come in with a 1-6 record after they lost to Dakota last week, 20-12, where Winslow stayed perfect at 7-0 after beating Forreston 46-14 in what was our game of the week, our NUIC game of the year. Winslow controlled that game from pretty much all facets after getting the first score on the board with just under 9 minutes to go in the first quarter. Last year, Winslow won this game 42-7 in Week 4, a game that was a running clock that saw Galena score on the second string for the Winslow Panthers. This year, obviously, Winslow has definitely proven to be a team that you could throw into Class 1A and see them being a state championship contender. You could throw them in Class 2A and see them being a state championship contender. And I've already been getting questions, and I'm not going to disagree. But I could see them going into Class 3A and being a state championship contender. That's just how good this Winslow team is this year. And a big reason why you take a look at some of that and say that is you take a look at 1A compared to 2A, and some of those games that we said, between 1A ranked and 2A ranked teams, and the 1A ranked teams have won more games against 2A ranked teams than the other way around. In fact, last week was the first time that a 2A ranked team beat a 1A ranked opponent when Forsyth beat Athens. The rest of it's gone the other way. Central A&M beat St. Teresa. Central A&M beat Tuscola. Granted, Tuscola is right there on the border of 1A, 2A, but they're still getting, some polls have them in 1A, some have them in 2A. You take a look at, who was the other one we were talking about earlier? Oh, man. Who was that?
I know we talked about St. T going either 2A or 3A.
Oh, Chicago Hope.
Oh, yeah.
Chicago Hope beating Bismarck-Henning was the other one, and then Morrison beating Newman. I mean, that's just a lot of things that you have going on. And, you take a look at what Winslow's done over the years. I mean, last year, they pounded an Aurora Christian team that is traditionally a Class 3A team. A couple of years ago, Forreston beat St. Teresa at state. St. Teresa is typically a 3A team, sometimes 2A. This year, once again, last year they were 2A. This year they'll fall back into 2A as well. But just 2 years ago, they were in 3A after they got to the state championship game against Forreston. I'm not saying that Winslow.
Well, we know it will never actually happen.
Right.
I mean, it's not realistic.
It's just how good they are. But the thing with Lee and Winslow is they have to be able to mentally come prepared to win every game. Because the minute that they don't come mentally ready, you're going to see somebody upset them.
Yep.
I mean, you take a look at a team like Stockton, where they only beat Stockton 30-0. Stockton was ready for that game. Lena Winslow was not. They had a lot of mental mistakes in that game that helped keep that game closer than probably what it really should have been. But you got to give credit to Stockton too. I mean, they played a whale of a game, knowing that they were
not favored to win.
They didn't match up well, but they played their game and they came out and they played hard. Obviously, they had opportunities to make plays happen, and it just did not go their way. But when you're playing the number 1 ranked team in state, a lot of times that's going to happen. In this game, though, Galena has played very tough in a lot of ball games. Obviously, the close loss to Dakota, close loss to Du-Pec. They've had a close loss to Orangeville. I mean, they're only a couple points away from being in playoff contention. They're not. This game's not going to give them any favors. I like the Panthers big in this game. Switching gears, going to the South Division, we start off with Milledgeville at Amboy. Milledgeville comes in with a 1-6 mark, and Amboy comes in at 0-7. Last week, Milledgeville lost to West Carroll 22-0, where Amboy lost to EPC 27-6. Last year, Milledgeville won this game in Week 1, 36-7. In fact, since the two teams have come together the last 2 years, while Amboy transitioned into the NUIC, Milledgeville has beat Amboy each of the last 2 seasons. This year, obviously, a little bit different. Milledgeville graduated a lot of their talent. Amboy, too, is on a downward trend from where they have been each of the previous 3 seasons in their transition in the NUIC. Something's got to give in this game, obviously. Both teams are going to play hard. Both teams have played hard. You haven't seen any change as far as that is concerned. And like we stated before, it's great when you can watch teams play. They play hard despite the outcomes and the circumstances. You never want to see kids give up. That is terrible when you see that happen. And so far, I would say none of these teams have shown that they've given up, and that is excellent. This game, though, you got Milledgeville wanting to run the ball. They have shown that they will spread it out and throw the ball as well. Amboy, on the other hand, they're more of a line it up, let's run a power type run offense, whether we go into a wishbone or an I, double wing. But they've also been able to throw the ball. Generally, they're going to look to throw the ball either on a seam route, a quick slant, or on a bubble route. So, not a lot of flash, but they do have a lot of speed. Obviously, Amboy has Marcus Wynn. Milledgeville has nobody that will match up with his speed. But as we've come to find out, it's not always about speed that matters. Sometimes you got to have ball control. You got to have line play to be able to control the other facets of the game. What are your takes on this one?
This is another one of those games. I think I've said this, 27 times now. This could go either way. I really do think that. Just based kind of on the stats and stuff that I've seen, I'm going to have to take Amboy.
Very good. I'm going to go opposite of you, and I think it's the first time in a while I have gone opposite of what you have said, or you've been opposite of me. But I like the Missiles in this game. I just think that you take a look at some of the things that they're able to do, some of the things that they have done, and I just think that at this moment they might just be a tad bit better. I would not be surprised if I lose this pick. I think Amboy is very capable of pulling out that first win of the year as well. And I probably would have told you earlier in the year I would have gone the other way around. but I'm not. I'm going to stick with Milledgeville. I like the Missiles in this game. Go to Pearl City, where the EPC Wildcats will play host to AFC. AFC comes in with an 0-7 mark after they lost to Aquin 48-14 last week, and EPC improved to 3-4 after they beat Amboy 27-6. This is actually the first time that these two teams will meet. They've never met before, either in the previous Upstate Illini Conference or in the current NUIC state. So that's pretty interesting, to say the least. Obviously, AFC has had some struggles. Last year they were 0-9. This year they're 0-7. So, that's 16 straight losses, and probably have to go back into 2017 to see where they finished out there as well. But, some things are tough, and obviously we had stated that at the very beginning of the season, where AFC was going to have some tough challenges ahead of them. And so far this season, it's definitely played out to that for the Raiders. Bringing in the Wildcats, despite their 3-4 mark, EPC is actually a much better team than their record indicates. Many will argue, and I would have to say I probably would agree, that they have the best defensive three-man front in the entire conference. But when you have a three-man front and you got 5 guys on the line, it's easy to start getting double teams, sometimes triple teams if needed. Isolate one-on-one matchups to help control and sustain the line play. Obviously, EPC has been relying heavily on throwing the ball with Lane Christian's primary receiver has been Braden Preston. Been really impressed with Braden Preston's play this year. Once again, another interception, another touchdown. And you keep seeing that out of him week after week. I mean, EPC may not always be winning the games, but you keep hearing his name come up every single week. And honestly, in my opinion, if I were Coach McNutt, I'd probably be putting Braden Preston in for all conference honors at the meeting coming up in a couple weeks here. But I'm not him. But in my opinion, I think Braden Preston at least deserves some looks for all conference. As far as the rest of the team goes, obviously Braden Herron had a huge game last week for EPC, running for 174 yards and 2 touchdowns. A lot of that coming behind the left side of that line where you have Wyatt Hammer and Eli Dirts plowing the way open for him. On the other side, though, with AFC, they haven't been able to get a whole lot going, and it's kind of hard to see. I mean, you watch, Ethan Drew, we were talking about him earlier this year, having some experience at the quarterback position. We heard that Coach Winterland wanted to change some things up to where he wasn't just focused on an option offense. He wanted to establish somewhat of a passing game to help offset some of these teams that they were going to be playing. And it just hasn't worked out well for the Raiders this year. Unfortunately, going into this game, too, I don't think it's going to work out well. I like the Wildcats in this game, too. Our game of the week takes us to Conley Field in Freeport, where the Aquin Bulldogs come in with a perfect 7-0 mark, and they're going to play host to Forreston, who comes in with a 6-1 mark. Forreston lost last week to Galena Winslow, 46-14, in what was our game of the week, while Aquin had their way with AFC in a 48-14 win. Last year, these two teams did meet up in Week 5 in a crossover matchup where Forreston won 62-33. This year, this is a conference matchup. Both teams are undefeated in the conference division this year. And so, right now, this is a game that has the South Division title on the line. Basically, the conference championship for the South Division. Obviously, you got a lot of things that you can talk about here. Forreston obviously was hurt with Ethan Mulder gone. Each of the last 2 weeks, actually, you take a look at their game against West Carroll, he didn't play there either. And he didn't play last week against Galena Winslow. Can't say that I necessarily blame Forreston for keeping them out a little bit longer so he can heal up. But you got a big game here this week with Aquin. Obviously, playoff seeding's also on the line. Win for Forreston will at least keep them potentially away from Lena Winslow until the quarterfinals. A loss for Forreston could potentially keep them away until the semifinals, which I know a lot of people would be like, oh, good. But if you're Forreston, you want to win, because winning ultimately gets you more home games. It gets you that first round home game. You can't be worried about when you're going to meet up with others, although that is quite the excitement, especially over the last few years. Forreston's looking to see where Lena's at. Lena's looking to see where Forreston's at. This year you got a couple different dogs in the hunt, and Aquin's one of them. Literally. And if you take a look just a little bit to the south of us, you have Morrison in that playoff, or in that hunt as well. Not playoff, they're already there. They're in the hunt to make some changes. And you can't forget about Chicago Hope, and you don't want to overlook Anawan Wethersfield. Both those teams can be very dangerous as well. Granted, some of them don't have the strength of schedule that they have, but they have a lot of playmakers. So, point taken, don't overlook your opponents. Just take it one game at a time. That's the philosophy you should be having. We can overlook anything that we want to. We're not playing the game. Anyway, Carrie, what you got on this game? Thoughts?
After the West Carroll game, I remember on the way home, we started talking. Forreston had trouble containing Tracy. Last week, we were at Lena Winslow, and although Benson didn't do a lot of running, so that was kind of a moot point, but can Forreston overcome that win, or the loss against Lena Winslow? Are they fired up? Are they jacked up? Are they jacked up enough where they'll be able to key and contain Will?
I like that thought process too, because obviously it was very evident against West Carroll that Forreston had a hard time controlling a dual threat quarterback. And this is no offense to Derek Tracy, but Will Gustafson is probably the best dual threat quarterback that we've seen in this conference in a long time, if not ever. I mean, he has grown so much over his sophomore year to his junior year this year. His play recognition is fantastic. His ability to run with the ball is transcendent as far as what Aquin can do offensively. It gives them multiple options to do different things that most teams cannot do, and it gives you an element of surprise that you may not have a plan in place for it. So with that, Aquin has the ability to match up with Forreston on the line, both offensively and defensively. Almost lost my pen. At the same token, Aquin has a very explosive, quick strike offense. Forreston's going to run you to death. Clock control, ball control, take care of everything, pound it out, get the big gains. You know, they're looking for that 5 to 6 yard gain. They're not looking for the home run, but they'll get the home run if you're not willing to play at a physical level. Even last week, despite their blowout loss to Lena, they were very physical in that game. They did not back down from Lena Winslow whatsoever. Lena Winslow was just that much better last week. It's not to say that they'll be that much better if they were to meet up in a couple weeks. Can't worry about that. You got to take care of what's in front of you, and in front of you is another big game. And like you stated, are you ready to answer that bell? After getting your brains beat in last week, are you ready to come back for the conference title on the line against a team that you played each of the last 2 years? You've handled them each of the last 2 years. But this is a team that we've been watching for the last 2 years. Since they were freshmen and sophomores, you could see them elevating, and now they're here in front of you. And they're fun. They're fun to watch. They play a great football game. They're bigger, they're faster, and they're stronger, and they've definitely increased their level of physicality in the game.
I think you also need their awareness. I mean, let's add a little bit of brain in there too.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's Aquin. They're smart kids. Anyhow, every school's got smart kids. I'm just throwing that out there. But, irrelevant to that conversation. Like you said, yeah, this is going to be a very fun game to watch. Obviously, very huge game. I keep going back and forth on who I want in this game. And I sit here and I think temperatures have dropped, winds have picked up. That can affect passing teams.
But they're also at Aquin, not Forreston, which is the coldest field in the NUIC. So, you have to take that. But then they're at Aquin.
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like that's a pretty hard place to play.
Aquin can be a hard place to play. It has been in years past. I don't know what it is about the field. I've always enjoyed playing there myself. But the times I've played there, we've come out on the winning end. It was always when we played them at the other location in Dakota where we weren't on the winning end. But no, you're right. Aquin is definitely a tough place to play. Always has been. If I were to pull up our stats that I keep track of home winning percentage, Aquin is probably right there around that 70-73% win percentage at home, which makes that a tough place to play. All right. I like the run game of the Cardinals. I've been no stranger to talking about Forreston over each of the last 4 seasons now. And I do like Forreston in this game.
I think Coach Zick is going to have, I don't even think that just Coach Zick, I think the boys themselves are going to be fired up after the loss to Galena. But I think that they're going to correct the mistakes, but I do think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a game similar to the West Carroll Forreston game because of how athletic and how strong of just a quarterback Gus is. Yep,
I agree with that. Like I said, tough game, awesome game. Lots of good games this week, but there's your picks for Forreston Aquin. We'll move into our Player of the Week segment and our Bench Warmers Players of the Week. In the North, we had Mari Roby of Lena Winslow. Mari had a big game with 113 total yards of offense, 2 touchdowns as he powered Lena Winslow to a 46-14 win over Forreston. And down in the South, we go with Eli Dirts from EPC. Eli had 11 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, 1 forced fumble, 3 quarterback pressures, and a 27-6 win over Amboy. On top of that, he helped lead the offensive line play to a big rushing night for the Wildcats as they ran pretty much left side all night right behind him and Hammer. So big games by both these guys to power their teams to wins that both of them wanted to have, one of them needed to have. Just great performances all around. Again, another week where we could have potentially gone with multiple people. But these two just set the tone as far as Lena Winslow.
Play.
Yeah. I mean, Lena Winslow, obviously, big game with Forreston. EPC needing the win to keep their playoff hopes alive. I mean, big moments. Create big players get rewarded. So, congratulations to Mari and Eli on their Player of the Week performance. Stop into Benchwarmers to pick up your free extra large pizza and wings. We want to say thank you to Eric White for our continued support and sponsorship with Benchwarmers as well. We move into our Power 5 as we head into Week 8, and there are some subtle changes to it, but not too many, but a little shake up here and there. And coming in at number 1, Coming in at number 1 still, obviously, Galena Winslow 7-0. Big win, obviously, over Forreston 46-14. Moving up to number 2 are the Aquin Bulldogs as they improved to 7-0 with their 48-14 win over AFC. Obviously, they have a big game this week coming up with Forreston. Speaking of our number 3 team being Forreston, as they are 6-1 after they fall a spot after their loss to Galena Winslow. Staying at number 4 are the West Carroll Thunder as they improved to 5-2. And they will have a big game this week as well with the Du-Pec Rivermen. And coming in at number 5, re-entering our Power 5 for the first time since the preseason, are the Dakota Indians as they come in with a 4-3 mark. They are a team that is definitely on the upside looking up. Granted, they have not been winning games emphatically like you would think that they could against some lesser opponents. But they are nonetheless getting big-time wins. Again, another big game for them this week with Orangeville. I expect some things to change around in our Power 5 as we get ready to head into Week 9 even. So it's really been a lot of fun watching a lot of these teams play. So that gives you a look at what we have going on heading into Week 8. Obviously, a lot of big games are in front of us. Forreston, Aquin, Du-Pec, West Carroll, Dakota, Orangeville. Great time, even Stockton. Stockton needing to get a win with East Dubuque. Lots of good games to get to. Obviously, a lot of games around the state that can generate a lot of changes to our playoff outlook. Week 8's definitely starting to become, that final week before you go into Week 9, obviously, and basically the last week of a separation type week.
All I could think about was Week 2 when you're like, oh my gosh, Week 8's so far away.
Yeah, it's gone by fast.
Heck yeah.
But get out to your games, get out, support your teams, support your community. As always, root for the NUIC.